go back to this recording if you have any questions or if you want to go through it again. And with that, we can move on to the next slide. Okay, so I'll start with our program overview. Next slide, please. So the Tribal Capacity Building Pilot Program is a new grant program that provides funding and technical assistance to California Native American tribes to build staff capacity to advance tribes' climate-related work. Administered by the Strategic Growth Council, the goal of the pilot program is to assist tribes in developing long-term capacity to secure funding and implement tribal-led climate solutions. The pilot program will fund staff salaries and activities that include planning, securing funding for, and implementing projects related to climate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. Tribal grants include 2-year grants of $150,000 to $250,000, and the technical assistance provider contract will result in a TA provider team that will support tribes throughout the grant term. Next slide. The TA provider team will offer tribes no-cost, flexible capacity building support and technical assistance services that will respond to each tribe's needs. Support could include things like trainings and workshops, grant application and management support, partnership building, peer learning, and staff and economic development. Next slide. The pilot program's key objectives are to 1, build tribal staff capacity to advance and sustain climate action, 2, secure funding to develop and implement tribal-led climate projects, and 3, enhance peer learning relationships among tribes. Next slide. So we were able to develop the Tribal Capacity Building Pilot Program and its grant guidelines through robust public outreach, engagement, and research over the past year, and we received valuable input from tribes and tribal serving organizations through our public comment period. Because of feedback we received, we were able to increase the funding amount for tribes and the technical assistance provider. So with that, we're really excited to announce that funding is available on a competitive basis with $1 million available for grant awards and $500,000 available for the TA provider contract. Awarded tribes may receive funding between $150,000 and $250,000 each for the pilot 2-year grant term. I also want to highlight that SGC now has statutory authority to offer advanced payment to grantees that are registered as 501c3 nonprofit organizations in accordance with AB 590. Advanced payments can total up to 25% of the full grant award. And at this time, SGC is only able to provide advanced payment to nonprofit grantees. Next slide. We also received feedback about the need for greater flexibility in applicant eligibility requirements. So I wanted to highlight that eligible applicants now include federally recognized and non-federally recognized Native American tribes listed on the NAHC contact list, with non-federally recognized tribes being eligible if they're registered as a nonprofit, a for-profit corporation, or a limited liability company. Next slide. Program activities must be located in the state of California and apply funds towards activities involving one or more of the following project areas listed on the slide. And based on feedback about the need for greater flexibility in project area requirements, I also wanted to highlight that we've added additional eligible lands in the project area, including lands managed for the benefit of tribes through conservation easements, lease agreements, co-management agreements, or partnership agreements, and lands that hold cultural relevance or are used for culturally relevant activities, including lands used for prescribed or ceremonial burning. Next slide. We have 4 eligible cost categories: staff, travel, tools, subscriptions and software, and indirect costs. And a few things to note on these is that tribes can use staff costs to support existing staff, hire new staff, or provide a stipend for volunteers, interns, or fellows. And indirect cost rates will follow the tribe's federally negotiated rate, or up to 30% if the tribe does not have a federally negotiated rate. And these are costs to administer the grant and include things like office space, supplies, legal or management oversight, workers' compensation, and automotive insurance. Next slide, please. So this slide includes grant funds that may not be used for the following costs and are not reimbursable. That includes things like costs that occur outside of the grant agreement term, direct and indirect construction costs, direct lobbying, or indirect costs in excess of the applicant's federally negotiated rate, or up to 30% of total direct costs if the tribe doesn't have a federally negotiated rate. Next slide, please. Okay. Eligible activities may include things like planning, securing funding for, and implementing projects related to climate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. Applications should address all the mandatory activities and indicate 3 to 5 customized activities that tribes plan to focus on. So mandatory activities are categorized into two key types. One is participating in trainings, workshops, and peer learning. And the second one is tribal capacity building pilot program reporting. So that includes conducting data collection, tracking, and reporting associated with grant deliverables. Customized activities include three categories of activities that grantees may incorporate into the tribe's action plan. These will be developed after the grant agreement with SGC has been executed. So tribes should select 3 to 5 activities from this list to focus on during the grant term. Activities can change throughout the grant term based on the needs, gaps, and priorities of the tribe, and tribal staff will carry out these activities with the support of the TA provider. So these can be grant-related activities like developing and submitting climate-related grant applications, including any grant that advances the tribe's climate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience goals, conducting climate-related grant implementation, or developing a grant management system. It can include partnership and economic development, so building partnerships with entities that can assist the tribe in meeting climate and economic development goals, or conducting economic development planning and project implementation to build economic and climate resilience, or planning and analysis activities. This can include things like developing a tribal community needs assessment, conducting strategic planning related to the tribe's climate goals, or conducting climate-related land use planning, data collection, and analysis. Next slide, please. Program deliverables should serve as lasting resources to support ongoing capacity building within the tribe. Required deliverables include an action plan, regular reports, and a final report. So grantees will work with the technical assistance provider to submit an action plan after grant execution that outlines the tribe's capacity building plan and implementation strategy. This should include the tribe's priorities, objectives, and goals for the grant term, a summary of needs and gaps outlined by the tribe, specific actions to address needs and gaps, potential climate-related projects and funding programs of interest, or a plan for how tribes will be supported throughout the program term, including the scope of services the TA provider will offer. Regular reports are where grantees will submit regular invoices and high-level reports on an interval developed between SGC and the grantee. And grantees will submit a final report to SGC that includes an outline of the activities conducted as part of the action plan, the outcome of each activity, and narrative description of positive outcomes, challenges, and lessons learned during the grant term. And I also wanted to point out that we will respect confidentiality of tribal data. So tribal data and traditional ecological knowledge may be excluded from all project deliverables to protect confidentiality. And SGC will work with the grantee to ensure a clear process for excluding confidential tribal data from all program materials. Next slide, please. So I'll now go into the process for submitting an application and the required components needed for a complete application. Next slide. And with that, I will go through the application submission platform known as Submittable. So I'll have our tech host stop sharing the presentation, and then I will share my screen. One moment, please. Okay. So the link for the submittable application can be found on our webpage, and we'll share that in the chat briefly. But once you click that link, you'll see this page. So this is the landing page for the Community Assistance for Climate Equity submittable platform. It includes information about all of our ongoing applications. So you'll see the Tribal Capacity Building Pilot Program application here. It includes a section on guidelines that will link you to the Notice of Funding Availability and the Tribal Capacity Building Pilot Program grant guidelines, as well as information about the deadline. So once you see this button, you're going to click Submit here. And it will prompt you to sign up for a free account within Submittable. So it's fairly simple. You just need to provide an email, password, and your name. And then once you sign up, you'll be able to use the same link to sign back in. So I will very quickly sign into mine just to let everyone know what that looks like. You can ignore this current page. This is just specific to mine. So once you sign in, you'll see our submittable application. This includes instructions that, again, will link you to the NOFA and the grant guidelines that will assist you with the application process. And before you begin, a few items to keep in mind is that once you create a submittable account, you can share your login credentials with others to work on the application or add collaborators with this Manage Collaborators link in the top right corner here. And we also encourage applicants to work on the narrative responses for this application in the linked application template right here. So clicking on this will download a Word document version of the application, which you can work on offline and then transfer the completed answers to this online application. If you don't want to do that, that's perfectly fine, but we do encourage you to save all your work online throughout your application, just to avoid losing any progress if the application is timed out due to inactivity. And applications must be submitted via Submittable, so this platform only by the deadline listed above, which is February 5th. And this is where you will input all the answers. So this includes a section on the applicant information, noting a point of contact, and includes areas where you can attach required documents that we'll go over later, later in the presentation. But there's also places to include your project area map, appropriate documentation for verifying eligibility of the lands. And this is where you'll indicate the funding that you're requesting. And also the section for narrative responses are here. So I do want to highlight that there is a word limit for each of these narrative responses. So if you are working on the offline Word document version, do want you to be aware of this word limit. It will cut you off right at like the 500 words or the 350 words here. There's also notes that include more information about like where within the grant guidelines you can find more information that relates to each narrative question. And going down, there is also a section for a budget worksheet template that you'll need to upload here. And once you're done, you can always save your draft, come back to it later on to continue working on it. And then if you're finished with your application, you'll hit the submit button and you should receive an email from the submittable platform just approving your application and noting that it has successfully been submitted. Okay, so with that, let me stop sharing my screen. I actually don't know where it's right here. Okay, stop share. And then I'll let Marky share the presentation once again. Okay. And so as I mentioned, here are the application components that are required. So there's the point of contact where applicants will provide a primary point of contact for SGC staff to communicate with throughout the application process and at the start of the grant term if awarded. This can be different than the applicant information, that you enter when you first start the application. There will be narrative responses where applicants will respond to a series of questions that offer detailed descriptions of the applicant's vision, capacity building needs, and program activities. There's the budget worksheet where applicants will complete an Excel worksheet that outlines the proposed budget breakdown, and the template is provided on our webpage and within the submittable application. There's also an area to upload a project area map that identifies the tribal lands and communities that will be served under this grant, including a project area eligibility documentation that will verify eligibility of these project lands, and a landowner letter of support document, if applicable, to the applicant. And lastly, there's the resolution or letter of authorization for the tribe, where tribes must verify their ability to accept and execute the grant if awarded through either an authorization in the form of a formal letter or a resolution passed by the tribe's governing body. And we do encourage all applicants to get started on some of these required documents at the beginning of the application because these are all required components that are needed by that February 5th deadline. Next slide, please. And this slide just shows the timeline and the general time frame for program milestones. So I did want to highlight the deadline for the applications, which is February 5th, 2024 by 5 p.m. Pacific time. And that is a hard deadline. So we will not be able to accept any applications past that time and past that date. And we are planning on reviewing all applications in the month of February conducting any finalist interviews in the month of March, and expected notice of awards will be sent out in the month of April. Next slide, please. And now I'll pass it off to Ina.
Great. Awesome. Thank you, Nancy. So I'm going to now go over the threshold and scoring criteria for the program. We can go to the next slide. So when we receive your applications, we'll start by doing a threshold criteria check. So it's really important to make sure you meet all of this criteria. Otherwise, we won't be able to consider your application, unfortunately. So we'll be looking for general completeness, making sure that all the application materials are submitted and complete, and ensuring that the funding amount falls within our awarded range. We'll also be doing a check for making sure that the applicant is eligible. And so Nancy has already gone through that criteria here that you'll see listed on the slide. And then, we'll be making sure also that the tribe provides appropriate documentation confirming their ability to apply for and receive program funds if awarded through a tribal leadership letter of authorization or tribal governing body of resolution. We'll also be looking to make sure that the eligible project area criteria is met, so that the program activities that will be located within the state of California, and we'll be following the requirements that Nancy walked through earlier in the presentation. So we can now go to the next slide. This is the scoring criteria that we have for the program. I'll be going over it at a relatively high level, but I definitely encourage kind of really reading through the details of the scoring criteria, because I think it can be really helpful in putting together your application. The program guidelines, pages 11 through 14, have a lot more detail on just like the breakdown of how each one of the criteria, how much each one is scored for. And so those will be the scoring criteria that our reviewers will be looking at, and definitely think it's really helpful in the grant writing process to be kind of keeping a close eye to that specific criteria. But I'll just kind of go through what overall we're looking for. So we'll have 15 points that are allocated towards introduction and vision. These criteria are related to an introduction to the tribe that the applicant will provide, as well as information around the applicant's vision for climate-related work, and demonstrating how that aligns with the overall program objectives for the Tribal Capacity Building Pilot Program. Next, we have 30 points allocated to capacity building need. And so this criteria should effectively communicate the capacity building needs of the tribe, demonstrate how the proposed activities would address those needs. So that would include priority climate, environmental, and socioeconomic issues that may be experienced by the tribe, as well as how this program could help the tribe develop long-term capacity to address some of those issues. The next criteria is program activities for 20 points. So this scoring is related to the tribe's proposed mandatory and customized activities and the extent to which they reflect and build upon the tribe's vision for climate action, as well as the tribal capacity building program objectives. Next, we have budget and timeline for 15 points. These criteria are related to the clarity, feasibility, and alignment with program objectives that are demonstrated in the budget justification that we ask for, and then in the timeline that the grantee or the applicant proposes. So that scoring adds up to 80 points. And then we have an additional 20 points for the interview. Our top scoring finalists will be invited to a 1-hour interview with SGC staff and potentially some interagency review panel members as well. The interviews will enable reviewers to ask clarifying questions and dig deeper into the applications. There'll be up to 20 points for this interview portion, as I just mentioned. So we can go to the next slide, please. So now I'm going to walk through some of the resources that we have available to applicants throughout the application process. We can go to the next slide. I have already actually dropped the program guidelines and notice of funding availability into the chat, but would definitely recommend reading through those. I think those are really helpful kind of overviews of the program to make sure that you are familiar with the process and scoring and all of those pieces. Nancy also just walked through submittable. Applications, as she mentioned as well, are due at 5 p.m. February 5th, and definitely want to emphasize that unfortunately we cannot accept any late submissions. So important to try to submit those early if possible, and certainly not late. So next slide, please. So we have a number of different templates that are available to make it easier for you all to put together your applications. We have an application template, which is basically a Word document that includes all of the questions that are included on Submittable, so that if you would like to draft out your responses on this Word document and then input them into Submittable, you can definitely do so. Just please be sure to be mindful of the word limit when doing that. We also created a number of different templates for the application requirements of a letter of authorization or a tribal resolution. You're not required to use those templates, but they're there for you if they're helpful. We also created a landowner letter of support template for you to use in the event that you plan to conduct your work on land that is not under the control of the tribe. And again, you're welcome to use this template, but you're not required to do so. And then lastly, we created a budget workshop, budget worksheet for you to use to put together your budget. We do really recommend using this budget worksheet because I think it'll really help make sure that all of the necessary information that the reviewers will be scoring for will be included in there. So those things can be found on our website or will soon be available on our website. I think we're just in the process of getting some of those templates up on the site, but they should be up very soon if they're not already. And I believe the budget worksheet already is. So we can go to the next slide, please. Great. So we also offer bi-weekly office hours that we really encourage folks to attend. You can drop in and just ask us any questions that you may have related to the application process. We'll have program staff who are there to be able to respond to any questions that you may have. Definitely encourage folks to join those if ever they have questions coming up or would just like to chat with program staff. So those will be happening from November 16th to January 25th. And you can register via SGC's website. Go to the next slide, please. And then lastly, just wanted to make a plug for the fact that we're also seeking a technical assistance provider team to support program grantees. This technical assistance provider would be supporting on evaluation, providing technical assistance such as planning, grant writing support, all of those pieces that we talked about earlier in the presentation. And they'll also be facilitating peer learning sessions and offering trainings. The technical assistance team needs to be led by either a tribe or a nonprofit entity, which could include a university as well, in order to be eligible, but consultants and other entities could be subcontractors on the proposal. So we just wanted to put a plug in case any of you know anyone who might be interested, or if any of you yourselves may be interested in bidding on that request for quotes. We are holding a webinar on December 5th at 2 p.m. To kind of talk through that request for quotes, and then proposals are due January 19th. So please feel free to reach out with any questions on that opportunity. And I'm not sure if maybe someone had a question, but that's actually the end of my presentation. I think we can go to the next slide. We're just going to go into questions at this point. So happy to sort of talk through any questions that you all may have. Let's see a few here in the chat already. So it looks like the first question I see here from Edward is, can the TA provider be selected, or is there a solicitation out for that role? Yeah, so that question may have come up right before I talked about the request for quotes, but we do currently have a solicitation out for the technical assistance provider. And yes, would really appreciate help with outreach on that RFQ. And it looks like Scott has their hand raised.
Yes, I was just hoping you could kind of clarify one of the earlier slides where you had the dollar amounts that were available. I think if I read that correctly, it said $1 million for one category. And if that category has potentially a 150 to 250 requests, doesn't that only equate to like maybe 6? So you're looking at maybe awarding up to 6 grantees, I guess. And then the other category that you set aside 500,000, what was that again for, and how does that relate?
Yeah, so great question on that piece. So yes, this is a pilot, and so we have a smaller amount of funding available. We're hoping that in the future at some point we may have more funding, but currently this is the funding that we have. So we have 1 million for 2-year grants of 150 to 250,000. You're right that makes about 4 to 6 or so is what we've been kind of estimating. And then we also have this separate funding that's available for the technical assistance provider that will be.
Okay, so the TAP then, the one that you're soliciting for.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay, so, okay, thanks for the clarification.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks for the question. Great question. Okay, I see a question here from Jordan. Is it likely that the program would receive further funding for subsequent rounds if this pilot program is oversubscribed? I don't know for sure. I think that we would certainly like to see more funding for the program, and I think it will be easier for us to make it a strong case if we can show that the program is oversubscribed. But we don't currently have any guarantee that we will have more funding for the program. But I think, kind of the goal of this program is to pilot this approach and hopefully be able to kind of demonstrate the success of this model and hopefully be able to bring in more funding for it in the future. So maybe why don't we go back and forth between chat and verbal questions? I see Ray has their hand raised.
Yes, I'm Ray. Thank you for taking my question. So I have to ask the question and not write it out because it's a little convoluted, and I'll try to be as clear and succinct as possible. So we're up in Humboldt. I'm with the Yurok tribe, and we're dealing with the offshore wind technology that is moving forward in the waters off of our ancestral territory. And, it's related to climate resilience, 30 gigabytes of clean power in 30 years is, central to the whole issues around climate change. And we are creating a department, and we got some funding from the Wind Energy Technology Office of the Department of Energy to create a department that will conduct our own research using our own scientists that will enable us, our council and leadership and community, to make, a determination whether, or how this is going to affect, the salmon off of our waters, the other sea life, the mammals, the marine habitat. And so the risks and the benefits, okay, of this important piece of, climate resilience. So it's kind of, off the direct topic. It's not about, so my question would be, is this something that you think is worth, submitting an application for, or is it too far afield? Because, it's not like we're talking about, mitigating the effects of rising seas off our coast, or management, traditional fire management techniques to mitigate wildfires and all of that. But it is a piece of this whole conversation, and we want this new department to be able to, we want to build our capacity to assess, all of the ramifications, the pros and the cons of buying into this new technology, and what we have to do to deal with it, and how we're going to, if our science tells us that it's going to affect the salmon, to what extent, or, marine habitat would be affected. So that's my question, and that's probably, yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I would say, and it probably would be helpful to go to the office hours and kind of be able to talk a little bit more in depth about kind of the scope of what you're thinking and the project. But I think, I mean, we do take a very broad view of what climate is and include, climate resiliency, conservation as a part of that. And so I think, assessments related to climate actions that the tribe may be considering, I think would be eligible activities. So something we have, as you'll kind of see in the guidelines, a list of some of the different, like, more customizable activities that can be included. That's not necessarily an kind of an exhaustive list. So we're really, I think, looking to see if applicants can make the case in their application that they have capacity needs, and that they can tie this to, climate related action in some way, but it doesn't need to be, sea level rise specifically. It can be broader than that.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, can you remind me, I was paying attention, but I didn't write it down. Oh, office hours sign up. So I see the link now. I'm going to get an office hour conversation going with you right away, and we'll see if this kind of makes sense. But, yeah, I understand it's not like, hitting the target directly, but, this is really a part of, how the tribe, where the tribe doesn't have an official position yet on supporting or resisting these offshore wind turbines, but it's the topic of the hour up here now.
Yeah, I think it'd be good to, for you to come to office hours and just maybe kind of like tease it out a little bit more. Understand, because I think the other thing that will be important for applicants to think about is, if there's sort of a broad range of different activities that you might want to work on. I think having like proposals that are really focused on one specific activity, if ever, for some reason that doesn't end up working out, it can be helpful to have kind of like a broader list of climate related priorities as well.
It was just, I think it was a smart strategic decision on the part of the tribal leadership to decide to house this department in the Division of Natural Resources. And, there are a lot of, there are there are like 89 scientists in the tribe, in that department, working on all of these concerns that we have. And we're dealing with, out of control wildfires. They're bringing down four dams on the Klamath River, and I mean, sustainability of the harvest, of the salmon harvest and the food source. I mean, that's crucial. So, yeah. Okay. Thanks
Yeah.
for your time. Appreciate your answer.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you. And Nancy just dropped more information about office hours into the chat. So maybe we can also go, I'm seeing a couple questions here around waiver of tribal sovereign immunity. Nancy, would you want to take that question?
Yeah. So we are not requiring a waiver of tribal sovereign immunity at this time. So I see that Athena has asked that, and then there's also a question from let's see, from Graton Rancheria. So hopefully that answers that question.
Okay, and then maybe we can take a question from Tara next. I'm going to try to go kind of back and forth. Nancy also remind me that we have the Q&A box in addition to the chat, so I'll kind of like hop through and also try to make sure, Nancy, that you can respond to questions as well. I feel like I've been hogging the question answering. So Tara,
yeah, I kind of had a pretty specific question about the budget worksheet. I noticed that at the top it has 3 tasks under mandatory activities for one, training and workshops, SGC facilitated peer learning, and then program reporting. And just wondering, not knowing what's going to be provided by the technical assistance person, like I know they're mandatory sections, but not really sure how to go about budgeting for them, because not really sure what to expect from them.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think we ran into some questions around this also for our Regional Climate Collaboratives program. I think it is a little bit tough in round 1. And so I think just kind of budgeting for what you think would be the most helpful. We have a range that you can include for like peer learning activities and evaluation, but kind of just thinking through on like within that range, what would make the most sense. And I think, first rounds of things are always a little bit challenging. And so, there is always an opportunity to come back and make some like more minor adjustments to the budget if needed, like during the grant term.
Do you all have kind of like an estimated goal of like, we want to have monthly peer meeting sessions, or is any of that kind of worked out yet, or is it still up in the air?
Nancy, do you remember what we included in the RFQ? Did we have was it quarterly for peer learning? We might need to get back to you unless Nancy remembers.
Let me check right now, and then I can add it in the chat.
Okay, perfect. Okay, great. Thank you so much for that. Great question. So let's see. Next question. Will awards be distributed geographically across the state based on applicant submissions? While Nancy is searching, I can answer that question. So we will be taking geographic distribution into consideration, keeping in mind that this is a pilot program. We're really, I think, wanting to be able to serve different tribes across the state and thinking about making sure that there's a real diversity of the different tribes that are participating. So we'll be sort of keeping an eye to that as we make our selection. But we do have like sort of set scoring criteria, which is what we'll be focused on most explicitly. Hope that helps on that question. And then maybe we can go next to Will, who has their hand raised.
Thanks. Will Micklin, CEO, Weepipe Band of Crimea Indians, federally recognized tribe in East San Diego County. Does the program support services provided for application development for related allowable activities, or does it only fund employees under the tribe for that purpose?
Yeah, so are you asking related to the application process to become a grantee for this program, or are you asking related to kind of once you're a grantee, if you would be able to fund like a
related to the use of the proceeds of grant award under this program?
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So for this grant award, we do want the tribe to actually, hire a staff person as a part of this process, or fund a staff person in some ways. It doesn't necessarily need to be a new person that's added. But I think a big part of what we've heard from tribes and kind of what we are intending to do with this program is to help build longer term staff capacity of tribes. Part of what the technical assistance providers will be doing is offering some of that like consulting support around like grant writing, trainings, things like that, to support that staff person and then the tribe as a whole on different projects. And then part of also what the TA provider will be doing is kind of keeping an eye to finding out ways to ensure that that staff, if that new staff member has been brought on board, figuring out if there are ways to bring in grant funding to sort of sustain that staff person over a longer period of time, or also if it's existing staff that's being funded, kind of, I think we're both through this program trying to help tribes advance on different climate related goals, but also building sort of the staff capacity of the tribe to be able to work on these things over a long period of time. I feel like maybe that was a little roundabout way of responding to that question, but I wanted to also make sure that it was clear kind of the reasoning behind that decision.
Thank you.
Of course. Great. So the next question we have here is, what is the project performance period for this opportunity? So I'm assuming this is for the grants portion, so it would be they're 2-year grants. The RFQ process for the TA provider will be 2.5 years, so there'll be a little bit of time before the grantees come on board, and then afterwards to kind of close out their contract. So why don't we go? Will, had you already asked your question, or did you have another question? Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Of course. And Tara, were you similar? Is your hand still raised, or did you have a new question?
I have another question actually.
Okay.
So as an unrecognized tribe, we operate through our nonprofit, and we are a small organization in a rural community. And one of the problems we have attracting, qualified staff is being an attractive employer. And so as of right now, we're working on it, but we aren't really able to afford to offer benefits. So we don't offer healthcare benefits, and we don't offer we do like vacation and that sort of stuff. And this has been kind of a stumbling block that we've run into in other capacity programs as well, that nobody really wants to fund that. And so I don't know if that, if that would be an eligible expense, is helping to cover the cost of some of those benefits packages to be able to attract and sustain good employees.
Yeah, that is an interesting question. Are you thinking, I think that, and Nancy, please feel free to chime in here too. I think that we had anticipated that this funding could cover benefits for like a staff person that would be sort of like paid through the grant, their salary as well. I think if you were kind of thinking of like paying benefits sort of across the organization, that one might not work quite as well. But we are like these funds could be used towards benefits for like a staff person who is being funded through the organization, or sorry, through the grant.
So just like kind of like normal, like built into the fully burdened rate or whatever, but just for the one person. So we probably couldn't get a new benefits package just for one person.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, that's a really good question. And something maybe for us to kind of look into a little bit more with our legal team, and kind of release some more guidance around that. That's a good question that I don't think came up during our engagement process that we could potentially consider. I do think, yeah, certainly it would be possible for the staff person that's being funded for a tribe that already has some of those benefits programs in place.
Or
Yeah.
do you think they would perhaps consider, you know, because we do have different departments, but maybe like a prorated bit where it just, you know, will cover the cost of, you know, benefits package for people who are doing work related to environmental stewardship or climate work or
Yeah, let's come back to you on that question. We can maybe release that in an FAQ. That's a good question. I think we would kind of need to put some more thought into it. And I think one question that kind of comes to mind for me around that is how far the funding that we're able to make available would go towards, you know, being able to fund sort of benefits across a larger group. But we'll get back to you all on that. I think that's a good question for us to put a little bit more thought into. Thanks for that.
Thanks.
Of course. Okay. The question in the chat about the workshop link. Do we need to register in advance, or is it only drop in for the office hours? So I think you can access the link online, and then you can either register in advance or you can kind of register in the moment. Is that right, Nancy? For the office hours?
Yeah, that's actually how it should be, but I just clicked on the link and for some reason it's just taking you directly to the waiting room, which is also fine. I'm gonna try to fix it where there is a registration page. It actually kind of keeps switching back and forth for some reason, so I'm gonna figure that out. But either way, that link should take you to the waiting room. And to answer your other questions, so you can either register or drop in during that 2 to 3 p.m. time frame. Is it expected that other applicants may be in the room? There might be other applicants in there, but if you would prefer that no one else is there when you're answering or when you're asking your question, I can also always put people into the waiting room, so there is some more privacy there. So it's completely up to you what you prefer.
Thanks, Nancy. And thanks also for responding to this question related to the requirements around peer learning. Okay, so let's go back to the Q&A. Can you give some examples of climate action projects? Someone is asking. Would you want to take this one, Nancy?
Yeah, let me, actually, would you mind taking this one? I'm trying to figure out this Zoom link while everyone is still here.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the climate action projects can be very broad. It really depends. Again, like I said, I think we're taking a pretty broad definition of climate, so it can include climate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. Shouldn't say the projects themselves can be broad, but the range of different issue areas that the projects can touch on is pretty broad. So, you know, it could be related to a clean transportation project. It could be related to a housing project that is able to house people who, you know, if you can kind of make the case that that's helping to build the resiliency and of the tribe, if there are challenges related to extreme heat, for example, that folks may be exposed to without access to housing. It could be a solar project that that the tribe might be interested in looking into. Could be, you know, a feasibility study related to a solar project, or grant writing. You know, kind of depend wherever it is that the tribe is kind of in the process of developing a project. You know, we really want the program to meet tribes where they are, and so you don't necessarily have to have like a fully hashed out project. The idea for this program is really to kind of help wherever those projects are in their timeline, to be able to kind of help with movement along that timeline to get things moving. It could be feasibility study related to a wind project. It could be sort of prescribed cultural burns. It could be a number of different things. So I would say, I think in the application, it'll be really important to explain what those connections are, especially in cases where there may not be sort of a direct like connection, really being able to kind of make the case for that. I think that we really want to make sure that this program is helping, again, with climate mitigation, meaning like we want to reduce the emissions that are causing climate change, but also thinking more holistically about how we make sure that communities are resilient and ready for some of the climate changes that we know are coming down the line. So yeah, it can be pretty, again, like there's a pretty broad range of different activities that that could fall within these kind of like climate related activities. So next we have a question in the chat. Will grid resilience and renewable energy systems such as microgrids, planning, and with an implementation phase anticipated as an outcome, be allowed to file under the climate-related 3 categories of eligible activities? Looking for specifics. Climate change, adaptation, mitigation have rather broad range of interpretations. Yeah, so this is actually pretty much what I was just talking about. So yes, microgrids, renewable energy systems, all of those things are going to be relevant for this program. So, you know, I think it can be energy related, but, you know, again, it could be related to forestry, conservation, wildfire prevention, a whole host of different pieces. I think what will be important is just being able to kind of make the case in the application that there is a climate nexus with the projects that you're proposing. So I see Raymond has their hand raised.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. My question has to do with the type of projects that you want to see come forward. I mean, given the budget amount, it would appear that this is more of a research type of budget. You know, this would be kind of the capital associated with applying the labor and man hours to study what can be done and what should be done. At least as we sit here with Fernandino Tataviam here in Los Angeles. My thinking is to utilize these funds to conduct those types of studies and say, hey, on all of my rooftops for all of my tribal members, what is doable, what can be done? Let's produce that report, let's produce that study. Am I correct in thinking that that is a good approach, or are you looking to see more of a shovel-ready project? Because I know you canceled out construction costs, so I can't actually build anything. So that tells me this is a research fund. Is that correct? Am I thinking about this right? I apologize. I've been in and out of this, so I didn't quite grab every detail. But if this is a research fund, that's great. We can do that. If I can utilize this to prepare the slate and say maybe purchase some property to build a solar farm on or something to that effect. I'm just trying to get an idea of what you're looking to see at the end of the day. It sounds to me like this is a research fund. What's your take on that?
Yeah, very good question. Thanks for that question. I think I wouldn't necessarily characterize it as a research fund so much as it's really meant to be a capacity building program. And we'd love to see outcomes around tribes being able to show progress on some of the different goals that they had in the beginning. That's really the way that we're going to be evaluating the success of the program. So if, in an application, a tribe says, like, we have a shovel-ready project that's ready to go, but we don't have funding for it. And we have like a really early idea for a project, but we need to do a feasibility study. And we need to do some kind of engagement effort to design, like, I don't know, maybe we want to do a climate action plan. It can be it's meant to be very tailored to what the tribe themselves is wanting to work on. And we would just like to see that progress is made on those things. So, if in the beginning we have, and the tribe will put together an action plan for folks who are granted funding, there'll be an action plan really right after they receive the award that can be very simple, but is basically just a list of those kind of goals, essentially, that the tribe would be working with the TA provider on, and with their staff that's funded through the program to be able to progress on these different activities. So doesn't have to be a shovel-ready project, doesn't have to be an early conception of a project. It really should just be, thinking about what are your priorities related to climate, and how could this program, like, demonstrating how this program could help you build the capacity to be able to do those pieces. I think that's what we'll really be looking for in the application, because at the end of the day, for us and for hopefully being able to advocate for more funding for the program in the future, being able to show that a program like this was able to help tribes achieve some of their own tribal-led climate goals, I think would be really powerful. So again, it's much more tailored to specifically what it is that the tribe is wanting to work on, more so than like we have a specific idea of what that needs to be.
Okay, quick follow-up question. I'm part of the tribe, but I operate Pacific Strategies Corporation, which is a renewable energy company. Do you want to see my application come from Pacific Strategies, which is a tribally owned company, or do you want to see it come from the tribe itself? What's preferable?
I don't know that one or the other is preferable. They're both eligible as long as the company is, like, directly affiliated with the tribe. So I wouldn't say we have a preference. It would really just be based on what would make the most sense for the tribe.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Appreciate your help.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Great. Thanks, Nancy, for putting the registration link in the chat. That's great, and figuring that piece out. All right, so we have another question from Jordan. Many of the project concepts discussed may require technical expertise to deliver climate action planning, design for resilient infrastructure, etc. Earlier, we heard that the intent is not to fund consultants, but rather tribal staff. Is the expectation that the TA provider will support all of those technical needs? Nancy, would you want to take that one?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Jordan. That's a great one. That is the expectation that our technical assistance provider will support on all of those TA needs. Marky, if you actually want to go back to, I forget which slide was the one with the graphic where the TA provider will provide like trainings and workshops and grant application assistance. But that graphic shows just the general amount of like TA services and capacity building services that we hope the team will provide. And we'll have a lead technical assistance provider, but our goal is to actually have a team within the technical assistance providers to really directly have expertise in what the 4 to 6 awarded tribal grantees are requesting and the needs that they've brought up with the TA provider. So the TA provider should be able to support the action plan, the implementation, and everything that the tribe would have any needs or requests on. Yeah, thanks, Marky.
Great. Okay, and I realized that I missed a few questions in the Q&A, so we can go through those. So can climate action projects be tied to identified future projects in other tribal planning documents, like a FEMA-approved tribal hazard mitigation plan that supports adaptation and resiliency? Yes, absolutely. I think if any of the projects that you are like wanting to focus on is already in an existing planning document, I would definitely emphasize that in the application, or at least mention that in the application, because I think that that's great for us to see that, you know, what you're looking for is support on some already identified need. So yes, definitely eligible, and would encourage folks to kind of clarify that or mention that in their applications. I'll come back to the next questions, but I see Will has their hand raised. Maybe if you want to go next.
Well, just to follow up to Jordan's question, I don't know if anyone has tried to recruit professional staff in the past couple of years. It's extraordinarily difficult. So the gaps we have for these types of projects are really professional economic analysis, cost benefits analysis, loads, and you know, whether it's housing or distributed generation systems. It's more of a professional service. So it's just very difficult to recruit those. You know, we're an off-grid reservation. It's really hard to get services, much less staff. So related questions are, one, if we receive an award and we're unable to recruit within the term, what is the consequence of that? And two, the obvious solution is not a permanent employee, but a contract employee. That contract looks a lot like a professional services contract. I don't know how you avoid that. What is the rigor of review on a fixed term contract employee? Not even employee. They're a I forget what the term is, but they wouldn't be subject to employer tax and our 401k program or what have you. It would be contracting with the individual, and I'm just wondering what the restrictions are that you're employing to safeguard against what would otherwise look a lot like a professional services agreement that may not be allowable. So thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that we allow in our guidelines, I would need to look back. I don't know, Nancy, if you remember off the top of your head, but we allow for funding staff as well as fellows and interns, I believe. I don't believe that we had mentioned contract staff as a part of the list. But I think what we're trying to avoid is having folks bring on like a consultant to do the work rather than sort of building that long-term capacity. And so I definitely hear the challenge around hiring. But just to be clear, are you thinking of bringing someone on for a limited term contract, or are you talking about like hiring a contractor as in like a consultant basically?
Well, if we're able to recruit someone with the skill set that would meet our need, there's no way we're able to support that cost, that employee cost, once the funding runs its course. If we could, we'd have hired them now, and our administrative capacity is radically overstressed with all the grants and allocations we're trying to respond to with the IRA, the BIL, the ARPA. Even for $10,000 allocations, we still have compliance duties that are equivalent to a $500,000 award, and we've got like a dozen of these, so we are completely overstressed. And there's been no supplement to the tribal G&A costs over this term. So if we're trying to be responsive to once in a lifetime, once in a generation opportunities for funding, and we definitely need the skill set. It's just it's unlikely we're going to recruit them as a full-time employee. If we can find them, they're more likely to be a contract employee. They're more likely to be part of a consulting firm. But if we can find them, we just wanted to make sure we could hire them through the mechanism available to us. It would be unwise for us to hire someone as a full-time employee, knowing that we couldn't pay for them after the term of the program runs its course. So thanks.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Nancy just dropped what we do allow into the chat. But that's really helpful feedback for us to potentially think about in a future iteration of the program. And also just to make sure it's clear, the grantee staff costs can include existing staff as well. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a new hire that the funding is going towards, as long as that person is working on the grant activities. So let's see. The next question I see in the Q&A is, would energy efficiency projects be eligible under this funding? Yes, I would say working on energy efficient projects are eligible under this funding. But, as to the points that have been made earlier, we aren't able to fund like actual infrastructure costs or like buying land or things like that. It's really, we're able to cover like the staffing costs, but certainly staff working on energy efficiency projects would definitely be eligible under this program. Okay. Let me know if I missed anything, but I don't see any more in the chat. So I'm going to go to the next question in the Q&A. Could you leverage this new funding if awarded with other grant awards the tribes receive to support a larger scale project that addresses climate action projects? Again, for the leveraging funding, you wouldn't be able to use this funding for like a project in and of itself. This funding would be used for like the staffing costs related to being able to do a project. So in that case, I'm not sure necessarily if it would work in that way. You could certainly, leverage other staffing costs to kind of build your staff capacity if you had another funder who was building onto the staff funding that we were able to provide. But the funding, I would definitely take a look at the questions or the information around eligible costs in our grant guidelines, which Nancy just dropped into the chat, that really kind of specify exactly what we can fund. And then the last question, could the funding be used in conjunction with climate action, environmental justice type project? Yes, so again, similar, definitely staff working on climate action or environmental justice projects would be eligible. But it would be like not paying for the actual project itself, but for the staff. Okay. Those look like all of the questions that I see in the Q&A. And I don't see any others in the chat. Please let me know if anyone has one that's pending that I may have missed. Any other last questions from folks? Okay. Seeing none, I think maybe we will end the workshop for today. Reminder that you can always reach out to our email address at case@sgc.ca.gov. And also really encourage folks to drop into the office hours. There was no one at last week's office hours, so, or I guess it was 2 weeks ago now. So, definitely come and chat with us and ask us questions. We're very happy to continue having these conversations with folks and respond to questions as they crop up. And yeah, thank you so much for your time and interest in the program. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Looks like we have 2 final questions that just came in the chat.
Oh, okay. All right. We can answer those. Do you actually want to take the question about previous examples of success stories, Nancy?
Yeah, so this is our pilot program, so we don't have any previous examples of success stories for the tribal capacity building pilot program itself. But we do have some other tribal programs that the Strategic Growth Council has had some other tribal programs. So I might drop in the chat the link for the other ones. Let me try to find it. So we did have a tribal government challenge that it was a planning grant program, so not exactly the same, but it could be a good indicator of some of these successful projects that tribes under SGC grant programs have done.
Yeah, that's a great point. The other one that I was thinking of too is, to a certain extent, the Regional Climate Collaboratives program may be another place to look at some examples. We have some tribal grantees through that program as well, and created some profiles of those and it kind of walks through a little bit. Those are also capacity building grants. They're structured differently, but that might potentially be of interest or helpful. And then the other thing, this is not a tribal program, but the Boost program is a program that we developed that in some ways, I think led to kind of inspired the development of this program as well. And so it's kind of a similar structure of capacity building program. That one is focused on local governments, but taking a look at some of the final reports there and some of the different projects could potentially be helpful for folks. Great. So we have, what is the long-term sustainability of this program? Can a tribe win in 1 year and build off of that in an award in subsequent years? That's a great question. We don't really know for sure. We're trying to work on building that longer term sustainability for the program, hopefully. But currently it's just a pilot. So we don't have any, we can't, promise anything in terms of future funding for the program. But we do hope that if we're able to demonstrate success through the program, that we'll be able to find future funding for it. And then we have a question, maybe a 1 year awardee that does an excellent job can have a shot at a different, more extensive award. Yeah, so again, Scott, that's a great point and something that I really hope we'll be able to do in the future, hoping pending more funding for the program. And then Lisa has a question. Can you share what success would look like? For example, a tribe making a strategic plan. Are there measured goals? Reduced KW job development, different energy projects. Great. Nancy, do you actually want to respond to that one?
Yeah, that's a great question, Lisa. So I think success would just be fulfilling the project deliverable. So there's 3 of them. There's an action plan, regular reports, and a final report. So the action plan would include outlining the tribe's capacity building plan and implementation strategy. And this is developed at the beginning of the grant term. And then throughout the 2-year grant term, the tribe providing regular invoices and high-level reports. And then at the very end, a final report to SGC that gives updates on the grant activities and activity outcomes. So all of these reports in the plan also is done in conjunction with the technical assistance provider. They'll be the ones supporting on the action plan and some of the regular and final reports as well.
Oh, sorry. I was just talking and realized I was muted. I was just saying, thank you for answering that question. And again, if there are any other last questions, please do feel free to drop them in the chat or come off mute. And yes, we will be sharing the recording. Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Scott. Okay. If there are no other questions, I will thank you again for joining. Really, really appreciate all of the great questions. And again, please do join office hours and feel free to reach out with any questions that you may have. We're really happy to hear all the questions and support as we can. So thank you, and hope you all have a great rest of your day.